Welcome to another edition of Wellness Webinars, a series of 14 timely presentations on coping with quarantine and COVID-19, brought to you by Carolina Behavioral Health Alliance and Mood Treatment Center. Today's presenter is Dr. Chris Aiken, psychiatrist, and today's topic is Brain Food, Eat Your Way to Resilience. Dr. Aiken, the floor is yours.
Okay, start your camera. There you
Going?
go.
All set? Hello, and welcome to the seminar on food and the brain. I'm going to be talking today about a new diet that is the first diet to be clinically proven to treat depression. If you have depression, I hope this gives you the extra steps you need to lift you out of it. And if you don't have depression, this diet has also been found to improve concentration, memory, and overall mood. I first caught on to the idea that food affects the brain about 15 years ago. I was treating a man with severe chronic depression. He was even on disability for it. Now, his motivation was so low that at every visit, he didn't even want to change. He didn't want to start therapy or change meds or do anything to rock the boat. He didn't even have motivation to get out of the depression. So this was a very difficult treatment to get through. One day, he walked in and looked different. He was smiling, reactive, lively. He had a new spring in his step. And I asked him what made the difference, because we clearly hadn't changed anything in his treatment. He looked at me and said, "I gave up fast food 3 months ago." Well, that got me started to think that maybe food does affect the brain. And over the next 15 years, we saw every year new studies coming out showing that it does. And in 2017, we saw for the first time that indeed a change in your diet can have a significant impact on depression. I want to thank our sponsors, Carolina Behavioral Health Alliance and Mood Treatment Center. And the way that food affects the brain is not like medicine. It's not a chemical effect. We're not talking about the way that caffeine charges up your energy and concentration. This is a slower effect. It's really affecting the health of the brain, much like food affects the health of the body. And the diet I'll be talking about today is based on the Mediterranean-style diet, which is also known to be the #1 rated diet for overall physical health. So I'll run through a few of the mechanisms of how food affects brain health. Basically, after eating healthy for about 6 weeks, we see major changes in brain cells. They look healthier, they have more connections, they're stronger and more reactive and responsive. The reason is that a healthy diet changes hormones in the brain, signaling called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which allows brain cells to grow and strengthen. Now, part of the reason that I was a little late in figuring this out, in fact, our whole field was, is that the brain is protected by the blood-brain barrier, which means that not much gets into the brain. We don't want things getting into the brain. It's a very protected space because it's the most important organ in the body. It's protected by the skull, you can't feel it, and the blood-brain barrier keeps most things except hormones like stress hormones and a few medicines from getting in there. So how then does what we eat affect what's going on in our brain? The answer is it affects it indirectly. The food we eat can reduce inflammation throughout our body. And over the last 20 years, we found that inflammation is one of the leading causes of depression. In the background of this slide, you see inflammatory cells. These are the same cells that fight infection. They're active and tangled like a tangled web. When you have a lot of inflammation, you feel like you have the flu, which feels a lot like depression. So simply reducing inflammation in the body helps inflammation in the brain and helps relieve depression. So this is an anti-inflammatory diet. Another way is that when we eat food, our metabolic and stress hormones change. You felt that if you felt a surge of sugar and then a crashing of sugar. That's the insulin. And these metabolic hormones run our biological clock, and they help the brain do what it needs to do, and they affect the brain health. So eating foods that give steady changes in your metabolic and stress hormones are going to be much better for your mental health than foods that give sharp spikes. It's no different than having stress in your life. The reason why stress makes us depressed is that it affects these same hormones. And when they charge too much on the brain, it's like getting a constant head injury, a small head injury all the time from these hormones. Over months, that causes depression. The third way that food helps mental health is by changing the bacteria in our gut, called the gut microbiome. These are also called probiotics. Basically, there's billions of bacteria in our gut that are eating some of what we eat. And if we eat more healthy foods, the bacteria that like those foods grow. If we eat fast food and processed food and sugary foods, the bacteria that like those foods grow. Well, the way that affects the brain is these bacteria are actually sending signals up to the brain to change our behavior. I find this very hard to believe. So I'm going to pause there and think on that. I have to look at the scientific papers again and again to really get this, that there are bacteria in my gut changing the way I think and feel. Well, I guess this is a bit like pet therapy. And we want these pets inside us to be friendly pets, pets that help our mental health. And we can do that by changing what we eat. The last two ways that food affects the brain is by improving the vasculature, the blood flow, so we get good, healthy supplies of oxygen and blood. That has a significant long-term effect on our brain health. And finally, there is a bit of medicinal or chemical effect that food can do because the foods we eat supply many of the chemicals that our brain needs to make the neurotransmitters we know about so well from antidepressants, things like serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. These require vitamins like B vitamins and folate for the brain to make them. And if the brain doesn't get enough of those vitamins, it doesn't make enough, and our medications don't work as well, and we don't feel as well. Now I'm going to show you visually just how effective this brain-based diet was. This was the first study in 2017 from Australia, where they gave people supportive counseling, meeting weekly for an hour with a friendly therapist who was supportive and helping them in kind of non-specific ways, not doing really intensive therapy, but just talking and being empathic. Well, that's very helpful for depression on its own. And in the other group, these patients with depression were randomized. For some of them got dietary counseling instead, and they met weekly with a dietitian to learn how to apply this brain-based diet to their life. Now, both treatments worked. Supportive counseling works and dietary counseling works. But what you see here is the big difference. What I've shown with the arrow is the drop from before and after. And you see the ones who got the dietary counseling had a much bigger drop in their depression level. How big? That's what we measure by the effect size. In medicine, what we care about is not just whether something works, but how much better than a placebo or another treatment is it? In this case, the dietary counseling was so much better. The number is actually about 2 or 3 times what we often see with an antidepressant. So that's a big effect. This is not a mild effect that food is having on the brain. It's estimated that 30% of depression is due to diet. And here we're seeing changes in the research that are bigger than the changes we see with antidepressants. Now, for you scientists in the audience, you might be thinking, was it really the food, or was it just that people who took on this diet felt more confident and better about themselves? Well, they did measure that, and they controlled for all those kinds of things that happen when you change your diet. You do feel better about yourself. You've done something, you've accomplished something. And when people tend to change their diet, they tend to exercise more. They might lose weight or even stop smoking. So they controlled for all those factors, and it still was the food they were eating. They even looked at how much people changed their diet. Now, that's important. Not everybody in this study followed the diet 100%. You can get a lot of benefit even if you follow it part way. And what they found was that for every 10% change in the diet, there was a 5% drop in depression. So yes, these changes were directly linked to the food they were eating. In medicine, there's always random findings, so we want to see that duplicated. And it was. Shortly after, there was another study that compared learning the diet in a group format versus going to a weekly social group where you played games and went on walks together. Now that's very effective for depression, and you see the social group is getting better, the dark red line, but the diet group is getting much better. Not just after 3 months, but after 6 months as well. The changes persisted. And they skimmed down the teaching even more last year and tried it out as a video. So those of you who are watching this video can be reassured that simply learning the diet by video might be enough to make a difference. In this case, they had college students watch an hour-long video on how to change their diet in ways that treat depression. And again, they were randomized, and here you see clearly the ones who didn't change their diet and didn't watch the video didn't have any change in their mood. But the ones who watched that video had a big drop in negative mood, so a big improvement in their mood. And this was with no therapist at all. They simply watched the video and they got a brief phone call a couple times afterwards to see how they were doing with the diet. Now, these studies have also been done, as I mentioned, in people who don't have depression, and they found that people are more lively, better concentration, they do better on memory tests, and better mood after about a month or two of changing to this kind of diet. Now I'm going to go over the core ingredients in the diet. It's based on the Mediterranean diet, and one of the core ingredients is vegetables. I've given you at the top the daily servings, about 6 servings of vegetables a day, but that's just for the mathematicians in the audience who like numbers and want to focus on how much they're eating that way. In the research, they recommended people to just follow the diet as best they can and not be too strict about it. Because part of feeling better and recovering from depression is pleasure and enjoying life and enjoying what you eat. So bottom line here, if you don't find it enjoyable to count servings and measure things and track things, don't do it. Just learn the diet and eat more of some foods. I'll mention foods that you want to eat in moderation, a little bit, but not too much, and try to avoid other foods. A few other things to know about this diet. There is no calorie counting, so you can eat as much as you want. You just want to eat more of certain foods. And no foods are outlawed. There will be foods you'll see that I'm going to recommend you just eat in small amounts, but you can have cotton candy, you can have corn dogs. There is absolutely no food that you can't eat on this diet. And yet, this diet caused more long-term weight loss than a calorie counting diet. That's remarkable. What I'm saying is that following this Mediterranean style diet and eating as much as you want in terms of calories led to more long-term weight loss than a calorie counting, calorie restricting diet. You don't have to suffer to lose weight or to feel better. The reason that is that your weight and your health is not all about calories. You can think of food as medicine, as I'm suggesting here, and I'm suggesting here that it's an antidepressant medicine. But you can also think of food as a good diet medicine. What if the best diet medicine was actually a carrot, a blueberry? Because these foods have ingredients in them that change your metabolic hormones and your gut microbiome in ways that lead to weight loss. With all of these foods, I'm going to highlight some special ones that have particular brain properties, but the goal is to go for variety. That's a way that this is not like medicine. With medicine, we want to find the single best medicine that helps depression. But with the diet, we want you to take a whole lot of different things, get a whole array of different colors, because each color has different brain protecting nutrients, different antioxidants and vitamins. So aim for a variety of colors in the vegetables. The brain friendlier colors are tomatoes and the green, dark green leafy vegetables. The darker the better. So things like spinach, arugula, kale, cabbage, and broccoli. Mushrooms, by the way, also count as vegetables in this diet, although I know they're technically not vegetables. But what about potatoes? Potatoes are the vegetables with the least health benefits because they're starch heavy. They're kind of like white bread in that way. But they're not all bad. Some studies show that potatoes reduce blood pressure. You just want to limit potatoes to one of those vegetable servings, unless it's the state food of North Carolina or the state vegetable, the sweet potato. The colorful sweet potato has lots of brain healthy antioxidants in it. Now, in terms of fresh versus frozen, for both fruits and vegetables, frozen is just fine. In fact, when these foods are frozen, they're usually frozen right off the vine. When food sits around for a long time, it loses some of its nutrients. So in some ways, frozen might actually be better. It's certainly cheaper and easier to store. How I recommend using vegetables, I'm not someone who likes them that much, but to find some that you like and sprinkle them on everything. So nowadays when I have an egg muffin sandwich, I'll put a lot of arugula on it. When I have pizza, I'll sprinkle fresh spinach on it. That way I barely know what I'm eating. And yes, I have adopted this diet for my own life. And I'll tell you this, I did it just to better understand what I was teaching patients. I wasn't depressed myself, and I wasn't thinking I needed to make this diet change. But after doing it, two things happened. One is I felt more energy and better concentration. And the other is that I couldn't get off of it. I started this diet just as an experiment, and I've been unable to stop, which is a bit frustrating because now and then I want to eat a Chick-fil-A sandwich, and I can't. Because when I go eat it now, I feel sick. Why? My metabolic hormones have changed. They don't like it. And the bacteria, the friendly pet therapists in my gut have also changed. And they want to spit it up. They don't want that stuff in there. To follow this diet, I had to get more in tune with how food affected me 30 to 60 minutes after I ate it. And I looked for foods that made me feel more energized and more motivated afterwards instead of sluggish. That's one universal thing you'll find about antidepressant foods. Even if they don't taste good at first and you don't like the flavor, if you're used to more processed or fatty or sugary foods, it may be an adjustment. Don't focus on how they taste. Focus on how you feel 30 to 60 minutes later. Moving on to fruit, this was one of the easier steps for me to make because I like fruit, and I recommend you do the same. As I go through these sides, look for some brain-friendly ingredients that you like already and start with those. Just pack them into your diet. There'll be less room for the bad stuff when you pack the good stuff in. So I started with like a lot of blueberries and watermelon. I love that stuff. And berries in particular are the most brain-friendly of the fruits. Lots of studies showing that the more berries people eat, the better their concentration and less depression. In fact, even though I've emphasized a variety of foods, I will highlight the blueberry as one that really stands out. In people over 60, eating about a cup of blueberries a day improved their cognitive testing a month or two later. And last month, 2 studies came out showing that when people have about a cup of blueberries a day, no other dietary change, just that, they had less depression a month or two later. That's the first time I'm aware of that we've seen a single ingredient change depression. What about dried fruit? Like these dried blueberries here. Dried fruit is just fine. The only downside is it tends to have more sugar in it, so you want to limit it a little bit, and if you buy it, look on the back of the package. Try to get some with less added sugar. And what about fruit juice? Fruit juice is not so great. You want to limit fruit juice to just one of your fruit servings a day, so 1 cup of fruit juice a day. And the reason for that is it's missing a lot of the nutrients, the fiber, and the skins that have lots of antioxidants in there and the vitamins. So you're just getting more of the sugar with the fruit juice. One question that often comes up with this diet is, does it cost more to do this? This study, I want to remind you, was done on people with depression. So that's remarkable alone that people with significant depression were able to make these changes, and they were not wealthy people. This was done in people who were living near the poverty line. And what they found was when they changed to this diet, they actually saved money because all those processed foods cost a lot. And they were doing this on the cheap. They were getting beans and canned foods, canned tuna, frozen vegetables. You can do it that way and find you can save a lot of money doing this. Myself, I like to get a lot of the fresh fruits and vegetables, but it is frustrating because they go bad quickly in the fridge. And here's one quick solution I found: Rubbermaid's Fresh Work. This is not a product placement. I know it'll look that way. It's just this is the only product I found that does this. They claim it'll keep fruits and vegetables 80% longer in the fridge. So let's look at a test of that. We have regular storage and storage in the Rubbermaid bin. After 20 days in the fridge, this is what it looked like. The strawberries in the Rubbermaid bin and the strawberries in the regular bin. The blueberries in the Rubbermaid bin and the blueberries in the regular storage. My personal favorite is arugula, and I put it on everything. But arugula and spinach tends to go bad within 1 to 2 days in the fridge. Keeping it in a bin like that, it can last up to 7 to 10 days. The next brain-friendly ingredient is nuts, and included in that is seeds and olives. Now, excuse me a second. Could I get the time written on the board?
11:54.
Nuts. Nuts have lots of healthy oils, and they have protein, and they have lots of brain nutrients in them, particularly omega-3s, which help build up brain cells. So for nuts, all of the foods that I'm talking about right now, by the way, are foods that you can just eat as much as you want of. I know I've listed the daily servings they used in the study, but you don't have to limit yourself as you're getting started. These are all foods that do so much good for your health. You can eat more and more of them. If you do have diabetes, your doctor may recommend you limit the amount of fruit you eat each day. If you're on another special diet that your doctor has you on for other medical conditions, you might want to consult with them first, but diabetes is the main one where you may need to change that with the fruit. The other thing with nuts is they can have too much salt in it. High salt tends to cloud the brain and raise the blood pressure. You can feel that blood pressure pounding on your brain all day long. You don't actually feel it, but it is like a small head injury all day long. So you want to minimize salt in the nuts. But hey, if you're just starting out, go for salted nuts and gradually shift over. What I did was get salted and unsalted cashews and gradually shifted the mixture toward the unsalted ones. I also got the ones that were dusted with dark chocolate or coconut and gradually mixed them over. Ground up nuts, otherwise known as nut butters. These also count. They're just fine, these peanut butters and almond butters, but you want to look on the package. When you're buying prepared foods, there are three things that matter in this diet. 1, buy something with lower salt. 2, buy the product with lower added sugar. 3, buy the product with the least number of chemicals on the ingredient list. That reflects how processed it is with artificial processed chemicals. Each of those chemicals potentially does harm to the brain and body. We don't know. Some of them we do know. But these are like medicines that aren't good for you. Nobody wants to have 20 medicines in their pill box, nor should you want to have 30 chemical ingredients in your food that you don't know what they're doing to your brain and your body. We do know that they're causing harm. We haven't gotten it refined down to exactly which one is causing which harm. The next brain healthy ingredient is whole grains. And when I first read this, I thought that must be a compromise between, that carbs are bad for you and they're just putting some carbs on there because people can't go without carbs. But actually, these are healthy carbs that are good for you. Whole grains lower the risk of diabetes. Whole grains have brain-friendly ingredients like protein and fiber and vitamins. This is the most complicated part of the diet. I mean, everybody knows what a fruit and vegetable is, but whole grains are difficult to figure out because there's a lot of product mislabeling. But basically, any carb you eat, from rice to pasta to bread to cereal, can be purchased as a whole grain, and you want to go for 100% whole grain. There's an example of some of the ones available. And this is what a whole grain is. Basically, on the right, you see white bread or white grain. It's had the good stuff, the germ and the bran, removed. That has all the healthy ingredients. So this is very similar to the difference between fruit and fruit juice. When you get the fruit juice, you're just getting the sugar. When you're getting the enriched or white grain, you're just getting the sugar. Any grain can be a whole grain. So there's whole corn, there's whole wheat is the most common one, but there's also whole barley and whole bulgur and whole oats, whole rye. The way you find it is you look for the word whole on the packaging on the ingredient panel. Or if they have it, look for this stamp. Not all products have this, but some of them do. It tells you that it's 100% whole grain certified. Unfortunately, the government has not stepped in to certify things, but this Whole Grains Council has. All right, here's some examples of what you might find at the supermarket. Some whole grains here. You see on the ingredient panel, the first ingredient is whole wheat flour. And we have Ezekiel sprouted bread. Just about any sprouted bread is going to be a whole grain. We have Arnold 100% whole wheat. So if you see that 100%, then you know it's a whole grain. A lot of products will say made with whole grains. That doesn't count. That just means they sprinkled a few in and the rest is all junk. These are some good brands there, and particularly the Arnold brand was rated tops by a lot of taste tests. These are not whole grains, so these are meant to confuse you. Nature's Own is made with whole grain. Rye, it looks dark, and pumpernickel looks dark, but they're not whole just because they're dark. There can even be whole grain white bread. It's rare and hard to find, but there is. And you see multigrain bread. Multigrain just means it's made with a variety of grains. It doesn't mean that any of them are whole. And then you see Arnold's Country White whole grain. What's missing there? It doesn't say 100%. You want it to say 100% whole grain, or look on the ingredients panel and see that it's whole grain. Now at the bottom, I've thrown a real testy one in from one of our local manufacturers here in Winston, Sara Lee's 100% whole wheat. So what's wrong with this one? It's got the 100%. The first ingredient is whole wheat flour, so it does pass the test. Well, what's wrong with it is I put in red all of the ingredients that are bad for you, high fructose corn syrup, and lots of processed ingredients. So while this is probably a lot better than Sara Lee's other breads, it may not be your go-to one because you see so many chemicals you can't pronounce in the ingredients label. Look over now to the left, and most of the ingredients there, except maybe one or two of them, you know what they are and you can pronounce. For crackers, we have some whole grain crackers, and here's one example is Wausau's whole grain. Mary's Gone Crackers has a lot of different ones. You see it says they're made with whole wheat flour on the ingredient list. So you see the word whole and whole grain brown rice. Not Ritz whole wheat. Why? It's not 100%. And look, the first ingredient is unbleached enriched flour. So the whole grain comes a few steps later after a few chemicals. For pasta, you can get 100% whole wheat pasta, and Cooks Illustrated rated this brand, Bio Natura, the most tasty. Not their regular one, same brand, but it's missing the 100% whole wheat. Another one, I even found whole grain gnocchi 100%. Popcorn is a whole grain, and this is a recipe for homemade popcorn because that's part of the diet. You don't want to have a lot of butter and processing in it, which is what you get with microwave popcorn. So with just a third cup of popcorn and 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, you'll see that's on the diet. Within a few minutes, you can cook this in a pot and it tastes delicious. And then you sprinkle popcorn salt, is a special kind of salt that clings to the popcorn better. Or if you want to go low salt, which is even better, use a lot of herbs. Herbs help give it the flavor you're looking for and help you use less salt. Fish is the next antidepressant ingredient, and fish has lots of omega-3s, which are one of the best things for brain cells. When the brain doesn't get enough omega-3 fats, it uses other ingredients to coat brain cells. And the result is that the brain cells look more brittle, like dried leather, like an old car seat with dried leather. You can see it cracking. You don't want that in your brain. When people eat more omega-3s, the brain cells look more fluid, like soft, well-moistened leather, because literally the brain has been well oiled. Fish has lots of other things that helps the brain, but that's just one of them. And you want to have about 2 servings a week of fish. Frozen fish is just as fine. That's often frozen right off the docks. So in some ways it's better, and some studies find it tastes better. In fact, the fish you often see at the grocery store, it looks fresh, but I'll never forget I went to Fresh Market and asked the gentleman at the counter, which of these is the freshest? And he said to me, this mackerel right here, because it was defrosted an hour ago. So most of the stuff, unless you're living near the coast, has been shipped in and defrosted. In one study, they took chefs in the Washington, D.C. area, the Washington Post did, and gave them a whole bunch of different salmon to try to see which one they thought tasted better in a blind taste test. And just as a joke, the Washington Post threw in Costco's frozen salmon from the Costco Kirkland brand. Well, by and large, it was a big difference. That was the #1 preferred salmon by the chefs, by a huge factor. And the reason is that Costco frozen salmon is frozen right off the docks in a special type of saline liquid that keeps it fresh. It's also the Kirkland brand is also the most affordable way to get your salmon. Beans is another brain healthy ingredient that you can eat as much as you want of, including tofu and hummus, and even falafel if you like those kinds of sandwiches. Extra virgin olive oil. Extra virgin means it has extra ingredients in it from the olive, nutrients and brain protective antioxidants that help the heart and help the brain. And about 3 tablespoons a day is ideal, but you don't need to count it. Now, here's a popular myth that you shouldn't cook with extra virgin olive oil. It's often said that this is a delicate oil that you should only sprinkle on bread or salad and that it'll burn on the stove. Actually, the opposite is true. Here's another one of those facts I find hard to believe, so I'm going to show you the data. Extra virgin olive oil burns at temperatures above 325 to 400. So you might want to use regular olive oil for very high cooking, but rarely do we go above 400 to cook. So extra virgin olive oil you can use for most of your cooking needs. Pan frying, I use it for the popcorn, and making eggs in the morning. You can get a spray and spray it on so you don't get too much on the pan. Here's the study, and I won't bog you down in the details, but basically they were looking at the bad kind of fats that accumulate after burning oil as the oil deconfigures and trans fats build up from too much heat. What you see in the far left is that EVO, extra virgin olive oil, is one of the better ones. It doesn't have much buildup of bad stuff. It's right there next to the avocado oil. Grape seed oil you see is one of the worst, as is canola oil. They're building up a lot more junk with the burning. And this is the same kind of study. It's very hard to read all these different oils laid out in the graph, but basically what you see is as the temperature goes up, some of these oils are shooting up unstable oxidative polar compounds, these kinds of things we don't want in our body because they can damage the cells in our body. Some of them are shooting up high, but I circled the extra virgin olive oil. You see it's down near the bottom, meaning that as you go higher in the heat, it stays healthy and stable. Now, actually, this makes sense because extra virgin olive oil has a lot of antioxidants in it. So as you raise the temperature, those antioxidants are going to protect the olive oil from damage, just as eating the olive oil, extra virgin, is going to protect your body from damage. All right. You're welcome to ask any questions you like about food from the bottom right of the desktop, or on the phone app, you may see a question mark. Also on the phone app, you can swipe back and forth to see my face or see the slides. I recommend the slides. For one question is about people with the autism spectrum disorder who have very restrictive or picky eating habits and low motivation to change. Well, for anyone with a mental health problem, motivation is in short supply, and diet change is not the only way to get to better mental health. So the first thing I would do is just open up the question and see if that person has any way that they want to change, because I know motivation can be low in autism spectrum. I'll get to a book at the end that has 30 ways to improve brain function and help mood. So there's no reason that diet has to be the one that you choose. But I will say that these tips are important for the autism spectrum because they're doing a lot of studies where they give people with autism probiotics. They give it in various forms, and consistently it helps their mood and their irritability. But that also gives you an easy answer there, is that if you or anyone you know can't make these dietary changes, there are some supplements you can take, like omega-3, which does help autism, like probiotics in a pill. And then that's an easy way to start this. You're getting a lot of the ingredients just in pill form, and that helps as well. It's a good place to start. What about OCD patients who need low glutamate diets? I apologize, I'm not familiar with that or with the need to be on a low glutamate diet, so I can't answer that. I will look into that. That's very interesting and good question. Can you really pop popcorn less than 400 degrees? That's a good question. You know, the answer to that is that if there is a downside to popping popcorn, it's that you are bringing the oil higher in temperature. So, but there's no other way to make it pop. So a lot of the foods I'm talking about have a lot of good in them and a little bit of bad in them. In fact, that's the slide we're looking at. So I'm not saying that popcorn is 100% good, 100% healthy. I am saying that it is probably one of the healthiest snacks besides nuts that you can get your fingers on. So I know that snacking is a big problem for diet. And I want throughout this talk to emphasize the healthier snacks that are whole grain based. Homemade popcorn and extra virgin olive oil is definitely one of them. Do tomatoes contribute to inflammation? I'm not aware of tomatoes contributing to inflammation. There may be some evidence that they do. In this study, they used tomatoes as a preferred vegetable, even though I know technically it's a fruit. They listed it with the vegetables because it has particular things that are good for brain health. Now, I want to answer a lot of questions broadly, which is that, and this has to do with this slide. In life, you're going to hear a lot of confusing messages like this food is good for you, no, it's bad for you. If you just Google right now, are eggs good for you? Half the sites will say that eggs are bad for you, and half of them will say that eggs are good for you. Up until now, I've listed foods that for the most part are 100% good for you. Now we're going to get into foods that you should eat in moderation. And Google any of these: red meat, chicken, poultry, eggs, milk, cheese, and yogurt. You'll see they do some good, they do some harm. They have found that restricting these entirely from your diet is not good for your brain. With eggs, we need choline from eggs, and that helps with cognition and depression. They found that people who have no meat at all in their diet have greater risk of depression, probably because they're not getting enough B vitamins and iron and other ingredients from the red meat. So the answer to all that is when you read that a food does some good and some harm, is just to eat it in moderation. So here you want to stick to the limits that they give you, but they're not that restrictive. Like for eggs, you can practically have 1 egg a day. Chicken, you can have 2 or 3 times a week. And among the milk, cheese, and yogurt, the yogurt is probably the most healthy, but a lot of our yogurts have a lot of sugar and processed ingredients in them. If you can get them without that, and the way you adjust to it is by sprinkling your own honey, nuts, and or berries on it, that'll be much better for you. All right, and I'm not going to say too much else about this slide other than these are the foods that you want to eat in moderation. They do some good, they do some harm. Because part of this diet is not getting too hung up on all the ins and outs of what's good for you and bad for you. So we got to keep focused on the big picture here. In the end, eating this way really works for your brain and your body. All right, now the foods to eat less of. These are processed foods, fried foods, fast foods, sweets, sodas, white bread and pasta, that's not the whole grain, deli meats like salami, pepperoni, and even turkey and ham, bacon, beef jerky, butter, and condiments. And the condiments probably vary in how good or bad they are for you. There's probably a lot of variability there. Mustard has some good effects. Ketchup probably has a lot of junk in it. And you can certainly buy condiments that have less salt and sugar and processed foods if you want to use them. Going back to the last slide, I was just asked about cage-free eggs versus regular. I'm going to answer that again, that this diet is pretty basic. I mean, they've made it pretty simple for people with depression to follow. And there are certainly a lot of books by doctors out there saying that diet doesn't matter too much and we put too much weight on it. I think what we're not putting weight on there is our body's ability to handle these foods. So maybe caged eggs are bad for you, but maybe not. Maybe our body can handle all that. It's all a matter of frequency and quantity. Bottom line is that this diet, without putting any other restrictions on it besides what I've mentioned, worked. If you're looking to go beyond that and do even better, that's fine. I'm just not recommending that because part of the diet is having fun and not putting too much pressure on it. But yes, you can go to the grocery store and you'll see that some of the eggs are enriched with omega-3s. Those are brain healthy. And I certainly believe the research that free roaming chickens like I used to have in my own backyard, and boy, those eggs are much tastier, are probably better for you. Are grain-fed meats better for you than supermarket? That's another one that I'm not going to go too much into. Probably so. I will say this. I did fly to Australia last year to meet with the people who developed this diet. And one thing they did tell me is that if they were to do an American version, and I have translated all these terms from Australian because they eat different food over there, they might have used less red meat. And the reason is in that in Australia, most of the meat is free roaming and they don't use as many antibiotics and hormones in feeding the cattle. So they did believe that American meat may not be as good for you as Australian meat, and they might have limited it further. Well, they had a lot of other things to say about Americans, but I want to keep this talk friendly and clean. You know, they didn't really respect our diet in many ways over there. What do you recommend for iron if you can't eat mammal meat? If you go to our website, moodtreatmentcenter.com, click on self-help and then treatment guides. And then down there, I'm sorry, I forget if it's under diet or supplements, but I do have a list for vegetarians of specific multivitamins and specific vitamin supplements that you should take if you're a vegetarian. Very good question. Avocado, I've been asked about. Avocado is a healthy oil, a healthy fat, and it is on the vegetable category, really good for you. Great thing to just slap it on some whole wheat toast in the morning, sprinkle some vegetables and squeeze of lime, and you've got your good avocado toast breakfast. Now, the reason that deli meats are on this excluded list is that they are processed. So that's why eating chicken that you cook at home and then peel it off the bone and put it on bread is much better than the processed turkey at the deli. Now, here we've given you about 3 servings a week of all this kind of junk food. I shared with you earlier that I really liked that when I started this diet because I was like, oh, I don't have to give anything up. But it turned out I felt sick if I ate this stuff after a while, so I just don't do it. Now, why 3 servings a week? Because if you want to keep your house clean, it's okay now and then to walk through with muddy shoes. You can clean it out. You can get the broom and clean it out. And your body has lots of self-healing, self-cleaning compounds in it that literally clean junk out. So we can trust our bodies to do the right thing. And if you're living a healthy lifestyle and exercising a little bit and sleeping well, it'll do an even better job of cleaning the junk out. But if you're going to track in mud every 6 hours in your house, it's going to be impossible to keep it clean. The cleaning service just can't keep up with the amount of mud. And that's what happens when you go beyond 3 servings a week. Your body can't flush it out anymore, and it ends up accumulating, causing inflammation and other problems. And that's where the health problems start to kick in. So there is a real threshold effect with this. And that threshold effect probably varies for everybody, but on average, 3 servings a week is where we cut it for these foods. Now, I mentioned that whole grains are one of the harder, healthier foods to understand, and I Forgot to show one of our whole grain cereals, so Mueslix and Ezekiel, and there's something called, I think it's like Engine 7 or by this firefighter who makes cereal. There, you can get whole grain cereal. It's usually at the bottom of the cereal section, and it's the stuff that looks like it was shipped over from Europe, like this kind of Swiss Mueslix. All right, so looking into the junk food that we all love to eat and it can be pleasurable in its own way, if you're going to choose some of that, just go for, like I said, fewer chemical ingredients, lower salt, and lower added sugars. Since this January, all companies are required to list natural sugars. Like if you're eating a blueberry pie, it's going to have some natural sugars from the blueberry, and added sugars because they probably put extra in there. These are some examples of highly processed foods that you want to stay away from, because in reality, anything you buy that's not plucked off the tree is processed. Canned tomatoes are processed. Store-bought bread is processed. So why am I not harping on that and saying don't eat any store-bought bread? Because it's not highly processed. So what we're really trying to avoid is the highly processed stuff. On to sodas. The cardiologists recommend limiting added sugars to 25 if you're a woman, or 36 grams a day if you're a man. And for children and teens, it's 25 grams a day. If you're under 2 years old, it's 0 added sugars. And I'd say the same thing for the brain. You can find the added sugars like I've circled it there. And what this slide shows you is that a single can of Coke gets you more than you're allowed to of added sugars each day. This was a recent study that showed something hard to believe, that in studies involving thousands of people who took sugar versus a fake version of sugar, sugar had no short-term benefit. They didn't feel better after eating sugar 15, 30, 60 minutes later. In fact, they felt worse. What I've shown here on the worst part is the alertness and energy were down 30 to 60 minutes later. So why do we even eat sugar? Why is it hard to get off? I've heard that sugar is as addictive as cocaine. Not really true. If you've heard that fact, it comes from a study where a mouse was given free rein to either have cocaine or eat sugar, and it shows the sugar. But all that tells you is that the mouse preferred sugar over cocaine. It doesn't tell you that sugar is hard to come off of. Most of my patients can get off sugar within 2 weeks, and then the cravings go away and they don't want it anymore. And what they tell me is they feel better, they feel their brain is sharper, their senses are heightened, they can hear better and see better even, and they have more energy. So bottom line there is that the reason we eat sugar is that it's addictive. In other words, it's instantly rewarding. There's something that clicks that makes us want more. But that click is not the same as feeling better. And people don't get addicted to stuff because it makes them feel good. I mean, drugs of abuse feel terrible. They get addicted because it traps the reward center in wanting more and more. We don't actually feel better after eating sugar. So why don't not go to artificial sweeteners? Well, this is a very important slide showing you that artificial sweeteners, the ones on the right, all cause more depression than regular sweeteners. Same kind of slide here. I have the artificial sweeteners on the top in silver, like a silver Diet Coke, and the regular sugary drinks on the bottom. And you see the risk of depression is much higher with those diet drinks, whether it's soda, fruit juice like Snapple, or iced tea. But also look at that. The iced tea, the risk of depression is not going up if you're drinking iced tea with regular sugar. That's interesting, and I can get to why that is. Coffee versus tea. So the bottom line is that tea is much better for your brain than coffee. When I read this research, I switched myself from coffee to tea, and I found I felt much better. I learned something that all my patients tell me is that when they get off of coffee, they feel much less anxious. They don't have that racy heart and tremulous feeling all day. Here you see something I've almost never seen in medicine, that the more tea people are drinking, 2, 4, 6, 8 cups, you see that on the bottom, the less depressed they are. Based from studies in 23,000 people, basically, if they were drinking just 3 cups a day, they had 37% lower risk of depression. And the reason is that tea has lots of brain protective ingredients, some of the best ones we know of, flavanols and L-theanine. Tea does have caffeine, which helps your energy and concentration, but it also has ingredients like L-theanine that protect the brain, lower blood pressure, and lower anxiety. If there's a risk of tea, it's renal stones, or if you burn your mouth too much from hot tea, that can increase the risk of oral cancers. Coffee is not so bad though. If you drink coffee, this is what we usually see in medicine, that it's called a J-shaped curve. A little bit is good, but too much is bad. And here you see the sweet spot is about 1 to 2, like 1.5 mugs a day of coffee, regular coffee, is where you get actually an antidepressant effect. So if you like your coffee, stick with it. It can be good for you and it's good for the heart too. But drinking too much seems to increase the risk of depression, unlike with tea. And there's other risks with coffee I mentioned there. And this is just for your reference of that sweet spot. If you're not a coffee drinker, but you want to get that sweet spot of where you have the least risk of depression with different drinks, I've listed that there. Alcohol. Alcohol was actually on the diet. People were allowed to drink, particularly red wine, which has a lot of brain benefits. But they were told to limit it to 1.5 standard drinks a day, which you see the amounts there. All right, I'll wrap up with some other ways to get these ingredients. Omega-3, which is in a lot of the nuts, fruits, and fish we talked about, can be taken in a capsule form. And we recommend that to almost all of our patients because it prevents and treats nearly every mental health problem. We have that on our website, how to get the right dose of omega-3. There's almost no risk with omega-3, but you should stop it before surgery as it can increase bleeding. Turmeric, this is a spice that has particular brain benefits, and we use it a lot at the practice in capsule form where it's been proven to work as well as Prozac. But unlike antidepressants, turmeric also improves concentration, which is very important. And it has a number of physical benefits as well. I find a lot of people benefit with turmeric supplements in arthritis. And cinnamon. In that study with young adults I showed you earlier, they were told to eat more cinnamon. And we know from animal studies that cinnamon protects the brain's memory center. That's actually what artificial sweeteners are doing, is damaging that memory center. So cinnamon has a lot of brain benefits as well. And lastly, we got questions on dark chocolate. I can tell you assuredly that about an ounce of dark chocolate a day, try to go above 70%, but even above 60% is okay, does help the brain, help concentration, and prevent depression. So there's your best healthy sweet. This study just came out a few months ago showing that indeed people who had a little bit of dark chocolate every day, you see that at the bottom, had the lowest risk of depression. And it wasn't just because they liked the chocolate, because the ones who got the milk chocolate didn't have that improvement in depression risk. Probiotics I mentioned, and a lot of them have been studied in mood disorders and autism and bipolar. We have those on our website, which brands are best. Finally, I'll mention that a few things for people with bipolar, that high fructose corn syrup and beef jerky, for reasons we're still trying to understand, have been associated with a much greater risk of mania. I'll end with some cookbooks. The best one I put there is the Mediterranean cookbook by the America's Test Kitchen Cooks Illustrated. They do a great job of giving you simple recipes you can follow, and a few others. And we have a free cookbook. The people from Australia were generous enough to give us the same cookbook they used in their study. That's on our website. And my own book has a big chapter at the end that gives you further tips on how to put this diet into practice. I'll wrap up with a few of the questions. I'm sorry I couldn't answer all of them. Canned vegetables are just fine. They ate them in the study. What kind of beans are okay? You want to go for a variety of beans. There's no such thing as a bad bean, so just go for variety. Herbs for your popcorn, any herb. You can use fresh herbs or dried herbs. Just use the herbs you like, even black pepper, and sprinkle them in there. Thyme is great. And what if you have gut issues and can't eat some grains? In my book, I have adjustments for people who need to be on a gluten-free diet, for example. But this diet I want to emphasize is recommended, the Mediterranean diet, as #1 by doctor surveys for overall health. So it's generally good for you, and it's easy to adapt the Mediterranean diet to your particular needs. If you need to be on a low salt diet for blood pressure, or a renal diet for your kidneys, a diet for gout where you have to avoid berries, all of those can be adjusted within the realm of a Mediterranean diet. And is Swerve okay for a sugar substitute? Okay, I don't know much about Swerve, but the best sugar substitute is currently thought to be xylitol with an X. And the reason is it's a natural sugar, it's not artificial, and it doesn't damage the teeth. So dentists recommend it, and we use xylitol in our practice as a gum, xylitol gum, for people with dry mouth. It really helps the dry mouth. I've had it, it tastes like real sugar, but it's not as strong. And how do you come off sugar? You can come off all the way, all at once, or you can lower it down. That's a great question to end with. I'm sorry, and there was also a question about pork. Pork was counted as the red meats, like the lean red meats. You just want to go for lean stuff if you can. Is decaf tea okay? Oh, great question. Decaf is fine. The caffeine does have some benefits, but it's not necessary. What I should say is we're not talking about herbal tea here. Herbal tea might be great, like chamomile at night for your sleep, but I'm talking about green, black, and sometimes they call it white tea. It has to have the real tea leaf in it. It's that tea leaf that they only grow in China, and well, they do grow it in Charleston, that has all these brain benefits. And the bigger question of how to do this diet, I address that more in my book. And basically, you do it at your own rate. You do it so you are successful and you enjoy it, and you make small changes. And a great way to do it is just to find more foods that you like on the healthy side and eat more of those. Then you just won't have room for the other stuff. And we'll end there. Thank you all. And please join us next time for anxiety tips on managing the pandemic panic.